So that became sort of part of my research also, the sacred groves phenomenon. So there are now thousands and thousands of sacred groves still present in India. They survive all these population explosion and economic boom because of the faith in the gods and goddesses. That helps in making them environmentalists automatically by their faith. So that's also part of the Bhil Dharma now. So being dharmic is part of taking care of these trees with all the reverence that they have for their gods and goddesses. Then Swadhyay Parivar, this sort of new religious movement started just about 100 years ago in Bombay, Gujarat, and in Maharashtra and other parts of India. And they have created new tree temples. So tree temples, what they have done is they have taken a part of the land in their villages, and that land does not belong to a single person, it belongs to the entire village. And what they do is that they grow trees of fruits like chiku and mangoes and those trees. And so those trees are their gods. They do not have any shrine in those tree temples. And they just go and do their puja to the trees directly, which is very common for tulsi and neem and many other people and other trees in our culture. But these are the mango trees and chiku trees. Even those were very easily accepted by Swadhyay Parivar as being gods and goddesses. So how the leader, the founder of Swadhyay Parivar, Pandurang Shastri Athavale Dadaji, how he convinced his followers to be reverential towards trees is that he simply gave them these slogans like Paudhe Mein Prabhu, which is very commonly accepted by Hindus anyway. Paudhe Mein Prabhu, Chhod Mein Ranchhod, which is Gujarati language. Chhod means tree, Ranchhod means Krishna, so Chhod Mein Ranchhod. And then there is a word called Kesha Karshan. Kesha Karshan means surface tension. I was discussing with Dr. Shah before coming here. Surface tension is the property of physical property which makes water rise to the top of the tree. So instead of Kesha Karshan, he said it's not just Kesha Karshan, it is Keshava Karshan, which makes water rise from roots to the top. So because there is divinity present in the tree, that's why water is rising against the gravitation. So it's definitely there is some divine power in trees which makes it rise from bottom to the top of the tree. So villagers were very easily convinced, and those became the tree temples. So the wealth that is generated by selling these fruits is called as Mahalakshmi. So this is our Mahalakshmi, and that Mahalakshmi is very divinely treated and used for more such religious ecological projects to create more such tree temples. Then karma, of course, is a very familiar term. What you dump it, you drink it, right? Basically, you dump it into river, and that's what you get to. So it's a cyclical concept that what you do to the environment will come back to you and haunt you. And you can change your karma by your present action. You don't have to just depend. You're not predisposed by your past action. You can still take care of your future by taking care of the present. Next, please. I think my time is running out. Devi, goddess. So Mother Earth, Mother Wealth, as I said, also Mahalakshmi is a goddess. Knowledge is also goddess. Saraswati, cow is imagined as goddess. India, Bharat Mata is also as a goddess, then goddess of power. Durga. So in various ways, Bhumi, Mother Earth is imagined as goddess. So millions of Hindus, even today, even in this global consumerist society, when they wake up in the morning, they say this shlok. Samudra Vasne Devi Parvata Sthana Mandale Vishnu Patni Namastubhyam Padas Parshan Kshamaswame. Before I wake up in the morning, before I get up in the morning, I'm touching you with my feet, and you are my mother, so please forgive me. So Hindus don't have to be taught that please treat Mother Earth as your Mother Earth. They have been reciting this shloka for thousands of years. It's part of their being. Most and millions of Hindus still do it. So ecofeminism is sort of a big gift from the Hindu tradition to the world, and ecofeminism is a very popular concept. Tantra and yoga also are meaning the same thing. That yoga means not just physical postures, not just you do for beauty and health, right? But yoga means to join body, mind, and soul. It's a unity, concept of unity, in which universal divine energy, which is in the universe and in divinity, is also in you. So again, it's a concept of union. I'm just going fast, probably to. I have time? Okay, here's mine. Okay, Punarjanam, reincarnation also means cycle of rebirth. That so because human, as is very widely known, that 8.4 million species is what soul travels all through the different species before taking a human birth, and depending on our present action, how our live this life will decide our future birth. So that again is a concept of unity. Then sannyasa and asceticism, we just heard that all the great renunciate teachers, they come here and they teach us Sanskrit and Vedic chantings and all, but even beyond their teaching is, I think, more inspiring is the way they live. I think India still has, I think, the largest number of monks living the most simplistic life, most simple life of fasting and limited consumption, sacrifices, renunciation, and five Mahavratas. This is an image of a Jain monk, and which is very similar to a Hindu monk. So these are the limited, very, very simple lifestyle that they have. That they teach us by being with us, by their living, by their life is the greatest teaching, the simple lifestyle that has become Hindu way of life also. And of course, the greatest teacher of simple lifestyle that we were discussing again with Dr. Shah since yesterday, that Mahatma Gandhi showed us that kind of life by his all kinds of experiments that he did. And in Jainism, this saying is that non-violence is the greatest dharma, ahimsa, and that is most widely reflected in vegetarianism. Even today, 700 million Hindus are mostly vegetarians. Even those who do take meat, meat is kind of a special diet for them. It's not like meat for breakfast, meat for lunch, meat for dinner. Meat is a special kind of a special dish, maybe once a week or so. So meat consumption in India has been always been much less compared to the Western consumption, and we know that meat consumption is, I think, second or third largest reason for climate change. All kinds of emissions are done by meat consumption, by raising the cattle for meat consumption. And Gandhi's life, once again, so 10th major teaching is Gandhi himself, Gandhi's life himself. And what a life it was. It's an inspiration for moralists, nonviolent activists, feminists, journalists, social reformers, union leaders, peasants, prohibitionists, nature care lovers, renouncers, and environmentalists. So to remember Gandhi is to remember the life of a person who had a very small meal of fruits and nuts, no egg, no meat, no seafood, his daily rituals and practices of a very simple lifestyle, his silence vows and morning and social walks, cultivation of small with big. So there is a story when you must have seen Richard Attenborough's film, in which he is having this big meeting with all national and British leaders, and there comes a small goat with an injured leg, and he leaves the meeting and takes care of the goat first, Mahatma Gandhi. So that kind of cultivation for small he had. Other story that Dr. Shah reminded me again is that abhorrence for waste. So there is real life example that he lost this one small pencil in the late hours of night. And Gandhi could not sleep entire night before he found that piece of pencil that his son lost. And when they couldn't find it, he gave a very nice moral lesson that if we lose this kind of pencil pieces, millions of children, they do the same thing. Imagine the destruction for trees brought out with this small piece of pencil. And here we are living in apartment or houses. In every house, every room, we have, I think, at least 20 pencils. So that kind of different, how far we have come from being a follower of Gandhi to being so wasteful. So that kind of life Gandhi had. And probably that might be the last slide. Next. Okay, so that's it, and I welcome questions and any feedback. Should I invite questions now? Or? Yeah, Asim, and I also love to have questions and feedback from you. Anything that you want to ask more or ask questions, we can discuss, have an open discussion. Yeah.
You focused on 10 rules of Hinduism. Can you give examples of the same sort of thing in other religions?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, question is that you gave 10 examples, 10 teachings from the Hindu tradition. What about other religions? So I recently published an article on Huffington Post in which I quote Dr. Martin Luther King, and in which he said that Jesus gave us the inspiration, and Mahatma Gandhi gave us the method to practice that inspiration. So all great religions and all great religious teachers definitely lived a life not too different from Mahatma Gandhi's life, which is very close to our generation. But all the great teachers have shown us by their lifestyle that what kind of simple lifestyle they had, and Jesus Christ being the biggest example. Yes. Yes. Yeah, Harvard University conducted a series of conferences for about 10 years, starting from all religions. So Christianity and ecology, Judaism and ecology, Islam and ecology, Hinduism and ecology, Jainism and ecology, Buddhism and ecology, indigenous traditions and ecology. So each religion, each tradition has a major set of teachings that are compiled in that series. And that's that's the website for that. Right. Yeah. Ishani. Yeah, so Hindus are about 80% of India. And, but I didn't really mention just about Hindus, but Indians in general, even South Asians in general, have that kind of lifestyle. Those who are practicing vegetarianism, for example, those who are, so most are vegetarians, even, especially in India, most are vegetarians. As I said, meat is like a special dish. And so, yeah, so Indians means I included all Indians, not just Hindus. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Places like Delhi, significantly less green.
Yeah, of course.
Is that due to population density, or is there less religious influence?
Yeah, so that was the question very frequently asked by my students also, that you are talking all these great things, and what about Indians living in Delhi, and what about those, the way it is changing so fast. So, yeah, I agree. I think that in their zeal to become mini America, people, especially in big cities in India, they are becoming all, obsessed with KFCs and Pizza Huts and Domino's and all of that. So just last week, my nephew living in Jaipur has had this Facebook status message: "Yoo-hoo, there is KFC in Jaipur now." So it's such a big deal that KFC has come to Jaipur. For him, he's just 15, 16 years old. So they are very enthusiastically embracing all the things coming from good and bad from America and Western culture. So in that zeal, it's an open question whether they will really become completely like mini America, or they would still preserve these traditional teachings that have been preserved for thousands of years in millions of Indians' lifestyles in villages and small towns. That's an open question, and we'll have to wait and watch what happens in next 10 years in Delhi, and how far KFC seduces the next generation. Yeah. Yeah, let's see.
This time we went to India in November 2010, and I was actually pleasantly surprised in that a lot of the large cities, Delhi, Agra, they had adopted a green mentality. So on the sides of buses, they would say, please throw away your trash, think green.
That's right.
And I guess it's they almost disconnected this message and made it westernized. Here, in America, green, in words.
Right.
Is
So they're learning some good things also from the
but I guess at some point there was no reference to any of the 10
Right.
points that you brought
Yeah,
up.
yeah,
So what
yeah.
do you think, they're trying to make green hot again in India, but sort of disconnecting it from its,
Yeah.
the traditional or the religious.
Yeah, it's part of embracing the West, right? Is that what's going on there? Yeah. But I think, again, that would be an open question, that what really works. Does that kind of environmentalism work, or this bottom-up or really grassroots environmentalism is what, as taught by the traditional teachings, is works? I think we need both. I think like a little bit of both we need. And whatever works, let's embrace it, and let's save the planet. Whatever works, I think. Okay. Do we have time, or we have some hands up? Okay, last question.
I remember in one of the Hindu prayers, we say, allow the environment to be friendly to us,
Right.
allow the rivers to
Right.
be friendly to us,
Shanti,
so
right,
on and
from
so
Rig
on.
Veda, right.
Allow the trees to be friendly
Right,
to us.
right.
So especially given that we are at a time in New York when the pollen count is so high.
Yeah, and I'm suffering myself.
It's going to be some allergies. So I remember observing while in India, whether in south or north, all the trees that are planted there are friendly towards humans.
Oh.
And that was my personal observation. Do you have any such observation?
That, yeah, I guess. I think any part of the world, if you go to the lap of nature, it would be friendly, right? If you go to Smoky Mountain, it's as friendly as Karkala or Mangalore or Dharmasthala that we were discussing yesterday. If you go to the inside of nature, I think definitely nature showers all its love to us.
So would you say that if we were not in New York, if we were in the midst of wilderness,
Yeah,
the pollen would be
definitely,
more friendly?
definitely. I think so. I think so. Because remember, native Indians have been living on this continent for thousands of years. They have as deep reverence for the nature as Hindus have for Indian environment. So it's not unique to Hindus. Yeah. Okay.